Death to the imposters.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily podcast on fantasy basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd, and as always, you can find me on Twitter at redrock_bball. It's been a marathon day of podcasts today, so we're doing another season preview, just tons of content for you to listen to. We're headed back to the Western Conference for today's show, and we're going to be talking about the Memphis Grizzlies. And to discuss everything about the Memphis Grizzlies, I'm joined by the host of Locked On Grizzlies, and that is Peter Edmiston. Peter, welcome back to the show.
Josh, how are you, buddy?
I'm good. It's good to have you back on. You were on last year talking about the Grizzlies, and we're going to do it all again and try and work out what's actually going on with this team, who, as much as they are the same, there's a fair bit of difference happening with this squad, and quite a number of question marks over this team. We'll start by looking at the players they actually acquired. That's how I do it on all these shows, and I think the biggest name, or perhaps the most impactful player that they have signed in this offseason is Tyreke Evans. But of course, there's significant question marks regarding Tyreke and his knees. Where does he sort of fit in as he returns to Memphis, where he played his college ball? Are you feeling any degree of confidence in him being able to play anywhere close to even high 20s in minutes?
Yeah, I think. Well, first of all, Josh, anyone with the Grizzlies these days just naturally gets injured. You need look no further than Ben McLemore, who was more or less an Iron Man. I think he played all but one or two games in his whole career, and he hurts his foot randomly in a off-season pickup game, and he'll miss the first couple weeks or so of the season. That's just Grizzlies luck. Foot injuries, ankle injuries, you name it. Ivan Rabb, who is not even signed yet, he's got an ankle thing. So I mean, Tyreke Evans is technically healthy, but who knows how long that'll go. The luck of the Grizzlies not great, but yeah, Josh, I think as long as he stays relatively healthy, and having spoken to him last week, he seems to be in good spirits, good health. He's about 18 months removed from his last knee surgery. So you would think that he's going to be ready to go, and he will certainly have plenty of opportunity for minutes. Right out of the gate, I think it's unlikely that he starts, even with Ben McLemore out. I would think that that's probably going to still be Wayne Selden at that point, with him coming in, because I think the idea is probably going to be that he ends up playing a fair few minutes as the scorer / creator / do it all guy on the second unit. And they will need, without Zach Randolph this year, they will need to find some more consistent scoring. He can certainly do that. I think odds are that he ends up playing, I think 25 minutes is if he's healthy, I think he'll get that pretty easily, and maybe, on some nights 30, because he can be a matchup problem, and the Grizzlies have often found difficulty finding guys that can create their own offense and do their own thing, and that's one thing he can certainly do.
Yeah, he definitely can. Now, interesting you say that he hasn't had a knee surgery in 18 months, because in the 9 months prior to that, he had 3 knee surgeries. So the fact that he hasn't had anything done in 18 months is a huge, huge win for Evans. And clearly, both Sacramento and New Orleans took it easy on him last year. They really nursed him through, and that, I think, bodes well for him with the Grizzlies this year, and that opportunity to be that backup 1, backup 2, backup 3 sort of a player that plays and runs that entire second unit is huge for him. We forget how good he can be. He was, I referenced this in a podcast I did earlier today, he averaged 25 and 5 as a rookie, which is just outstanding numbers, and obviously it's been downhill since then, but he's had plenty of top 50 fantasy seasons in 32 minutes, getting those big assists, rebounds, steals, starting to hit his threes at an increased rate, scoring at a high level. So he's a guy that I don't hate having a look at with a last pick in the draft, with so many, it's not like the backup point guard role is locked down by anybody. It's not like the backup wing positions are filled with studs waiting for their opportunity. Evans can easily get these minutes if the knee holds up. So that's why in the last pick, it's fantastic, because his upside is better than almost anybody at that position. with maybe the exception of one of his teammates, which we'll talk a little bit about later. But I really like Evans here. It is the concern with the knees, clearly, but it is trending in the right direction. Now, he talked about McLemore, and I think that McLemore was pretty much going to be a lock to start if he hadn't have broken his foot and was going to miss the start of the season. And I do agree with you that Wayne Selden will get this position. McLemore, I thought his first 2 seasons were promising. He showed improvements, and then George Karl really ruined him in that third year, and he couldn't really recover last year. He was a strong rebounding guard. He has never really put it all together, but he can do more things than I think we've seen. So, what's your hope for McLemore this year? Do you think that Selden will remain starting all year, or that McLemore will take that job once he returns from his injury?
I think the indication, based on what they paid for McLemore and how quickly they signed him in free agency, they really have a high degree of confidence in him, and they see him as a guy that still has potential to grow and get better. That's not always the case with guys in their, going into their 5th season. You don't tend to see a lot of major improvements. It has happened. It does happen, but they, to me, are overpaying, and they overpaid in free agency with that in mind. The fact that he's younger. They consider they have kind of a concept that they like to say, called a second draft, where they feel like this is a second draft, like he's almost a rookie in a sense that he was so miscast or kind of thrown around amid all the chaos in Sacramento that he just wasn't developed properly, and so they feel like maybe they can find some development that wasn't there before. I don't know that that's true. I'm not sure I buy that. I think there were probably better ways for them to spend their money. And had they been a little more patient, they wouldn't have had to spend, the better part of $11 million over 2 years to get McLemore. But that said, I think he is the guy that they want to succeed at that position. So to me, he'll get every opportunity. Unless Wayne Selden comes out and is absolutely spectacular, I think McLemore, once he's healthy, slides right in and retakes that starting position. As far as what he can do from a fantasy perspective, he's going to have to get a little more consistent with that 3-point shot. You're right to bring up George Karl, because George Karl played mind games with him, and that's something that McLemore's talked about. That it's it just messed him up, and George Karl does that with players. He likes to push their buttons. Some guys are into that, some guys aren't, and he wasn't. And that was it kind of stunted his growth to a large extent. He's got to get more consistent with that 3-point shot. I don't know how much spacing he's going to be able to get. That all depends a lot on Chandler Parsons and how healthy he is and what the Grizzlies offense is going to look like, which is still very much up in the air right now. But if he can get that consistency back and kind of look like he did that stretch, he had a stretch, basically after the All-Star break last year, after they traded Boogie Cousins, where he looked pretty good. I mean, he was around 40% from 3, and he looked okay. If you get that guy, then I think that's going to be all right for the Grizzlies. And from a fantasy perspective, that's okay. I wouldn't rely too much on him, but I think there could be some value there because he's going to get an opportunity. He will get a chance in Memphis.
He shot 44% from 3 after Cousins was traded. So that's
obviously
a huge number, and he's going to have that opportunity. Unless Summer League Wayne Selden appears as regular season Wayne Selden, he's going to have that opportunity to overtake him and get that job back. But if we're talking about these group of shooting guard type players, Tyreek has clearly the most upside out of all that group and clearly the most fantasy value, and he'd be the guy that if I'm spending a last pick on it, it is going to be Tyreke Evans rather than McLemore or Wayne Selden. They brought over Rade Zagorac.
Josh, not to interrupt, but I think also that the idea what you talk about with Tyreek that's important, that those guys, Tyreek is not. Some people will talk about Tyreek as a backup point guard, and he really isn't. But he will be in a role of playmaking, because if you look at the backup point guard position for the Grizzlies right now, and I'm sure we'll talk about it, it's totally up in the air, major question marks all over the place. So the way that the plays are going to unfold on the court, likely you will see Tyreek take a big role in determining what happens on that play. So you're talking about a guy that could rack up assist numbers. You're talking about a guy that could rack up rebounds. You're talking about a guy that's going to get to the foul line. You're talking about the opportunity to really fill up a number of different categories in statistically. Whereas McLemore and the other guys, I think, have some opportunity in terms of 3-point shooting and points and that kind of thing. But maybe rebounding from McLemore, but I don't know that you're going to get the kind of spread that you could theoretically get. And I think you're going to get sporadic, big, huge games from Tyreke Evans, which he's had a habit of doing against the Grizzlies, where he'll throw up a 30-point, 7 assist, 9 rebound kind of game, or 25, 5 and 5, things like that. He can do that from time to time. So I absolutely, if I'm spending a late pick, there are worse ways to spend it than Tyreke Evans.
No, there's not many better ways to spend it than Tyreke Evans in that spot, I don't think. Now, they also brought over Rade Zagora. It's a second-round pick from last season. I would assume that he's not going to be a regular part of the rotation. He'll probably spend some time in the G League. Now, Peter, the Memphis team, Memphis Hustle, is that right, in the G League?
That's right. Yeah, they just bought the rights to that team, and they just had the expansion draft a couple weeks ago. So yeah, that's where they'll be in South Haven, Mississippi, which is like probably 15 minutes away from FedEx Forum where the Grizzlies play. So you'll see guys. I mean, they will practice with the main team, and in fact, actually, the facilities at FedEx Forum will be used both for the Hustle and for the Grizzlies. So guys I would imagine you'll see a tremendous amount of movement from a lot of the kind of rookie/young guys, sort of that in-between type guy. You'll see a lot of them go up and down all the time. And Rade is probably going to be one of those guys that spends the majority of his time with the Hustle, because he didn't look, from summer league is what it is, but he looked really overmatched.
Yep.
And very slow, and mentally very slow. Just wasn't making decisions very quickly. And if you watched him, when he played for Megalex, he was that wasn't him. I mean, he was a much better passer. He was had a decent shot, has good size, has some ability with the basketball in his hand. That it didn't really show that with the Grizzlies. Part of that was also that he hadn't played competitively in about 4 months prior to Summer League. That certainly didn't help him. But yeah, I wouldn't expect that he will be even a little part of the rotation unless he radically has improved in the last 3 months or so.
The other guy that they signed Kobe Simmons to a 2-way deal, but they brought back Mario Chalmers, who had some significant success here as a backup point guard behind Mike Conley before tearing his Achilles. He didn't play at all last season. He's over the age of 30 and returning from an Achilles injury. He's on a very lightly guaranteed contract. Peter, do you think that Mario Chalmers is on the opening night roster?
I do.
Because this team's got a lot of decisions to make with the roster. They've got too many guys signed.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking a lot about that here locally, Josh, about how they're going to settle all this roster, jam that they've got. They've got a tremendous amount of work to do there. But they just recently had a press conference last week here in Memphis, and featured were Ben McLemore, Tyreke Evans, and Mario Chalmers.
Okay.
And you don't tend to feature a guy that you sign to a partially guaranteed training camp type deal. You don't tend to feature them on a dais alongside the other fully guaranteed guys, to me, unless you have, the thought that they're going to be part of the team. I don't think that the Grizzlies would go through the motions of signing Mario Chalmers to a camp deal. It's a low guarantee. They can, certainly get out of it, prior to roster cutdown day if they need to, very cheaply. But I don't think they go through the trouble of doing it. And I don't think they want to go through the hype of bringing in Mario Chalmers, who is a bit of a cult figure here in Memphis, for what he did with the Grizzlies. You'll remember a couple of years ago, before the Achilles tear, when Mike Conley went out, he was outstanding. Yeah, and he had just helped the Grizzlies to beat the soon-to-be champion Cleveland Cavaliers in Cleveland with only 7 players. And Tony Allen had a huge game that day. Chalmers was fantastic. And then he tore his Achilles in Boston the next game, and nothing was the same. I don't think they go through the trouble of bringing him in to the hype, to the level that they've done, unless they want to keep him. So I think he's the preponderance to me of evidence would indicate that he has a place, unless he shows up at training camp and is just physically unable to go. And all indications are, from the people I've talked to this summer, that his workouts have been good. They like him. He doesn't look, especially impaired. He's not the same guy. He's not going to be Mario Chalmers of 2 years ago or Mario Chalmers of 4 or 5 years ago when he was, helping the Heat to win championships. But he's going to be good, and he has a good relationship with David Fizdale going back to Miami. That's another reason I think that he sticks around. So to me, he would be the favorite to have a spot. If all things being equal, he would have the edge over some of those other guys.
So that leads me to the natural follow-up question, is that who gets cut? Because of the guys that they've got signed, and we're not even including Ivan Raab in this discussion because he hasn't been signed, and we're assuming JaMychal Green will be back, which we'll talk about in a second. There's 2 guys that need to be cut off this roster. Who do you think those 2 guys are going to be?
Well, I think ideally, Josh, they're still looking, and they have been poking around a lot and may yet be able to find a trade that they like to clear out a little bit of this space. So they've been looking for a 2-for-1 deal for a while. They may still be able to do it. Some of that is predicated on what happens with JaMychal Green and all of that. But I think the guys that you would look at in terms of a trade, Brandon Wright is very much hanging out there, and he was unhappy last year with his role. He was unhappy with the communication that he received. He didn't feel like he was adequately used. He didn't feel like he was part of the mix. And that, I don't know that has changed at all. Even though Zach Randolph is gone, I still think there's some question about how he's used. And, particularly with what David Fizdale wants from his bigs, Brandon Wright is a fairly limited guy. I don't know that he's a natural fit with David Fizdale right now. I think he sees him. Fizdale likes him, but sees him in a pretty limited role. And I think Wright wants to do a little bit more. So they'd like to trade him, and they'd like to package somebody with him in order to get that deal done. If that doesn't happen, in terms of cuts, I think Jarrell Martin is very much hanging out there and would be the most obvious cut. I just don't know what his role is, Josh. I don't know what he does in the NBA. I don't know what he does well or even decently at this stage. I think they had some hope about his development, but not only did he have ankle issues coming into the league, but he got plantar fasciitis, and he just never really has developed at all. So I think he's hanging out there. I think one of the point guards, most likely Andrew Harrison, would be the other if you're looking for another cut. They still have to figure out what they're going to do with Ivan Rabb. They've signed Dylan Brooks to the deal. They've got, Kobe Simmons as a two-way player. Ivan Rabb is not going to be a two-way guy, but there is some serious concern about the ankle injury that he picked up in pre-draft workouts that, he thinks that Rabb thinks cost him a first-round pick slot, and he may be right. I don't know. But that injury apparently is a little more serious than expected, to the point where it's been an issue for the Grizzlies, I think, in terms of signing him. It's affected what they want to do with that signing. They're just a little nervous about the prospect of that. So what you have is 29 other second round picks that are pretty well dealt with. Whether they are going to be signed. I think, if I'm not mistaken, and you may know this more than me, but I think guys 31 through 45 are all signed pretty much to normal contracts in the league, normal NBA rookie contracts. There may be one except, and Jonah Bolden is being stashed this year, but everybody else is signed to a full regular contract. So Rabb is right in the middle of that group. And of the others, a few are signed to regular deals. Some are stashed overseas. Some are going to be G League guys. There's a few two-way guys in there, but guys at 35 aren't two-way guys. So he's not going to be a two-way guy. I don't know how stoked they are about signing him to a regular contract with his ankle injury right now. So right now they're in a little bit of an impasse there, and you got to do something with him. I mean, you can't just leave him unsigned. So that still has to work itself out. In addition to the JaMychal Green situation, which means that I think cuts are coming. And if you put me on the spot, I would say Jarrell Martin and Andrew Harrison are the two. The
only other guy in the draft whose, I guess, future for this season is still up in the air is Jerome Blossomgame, who was the 59th pick. We don't know what he's being, if he's being two-wayed or he hasn't signed any contract yet. Everyone else has signed some sort of contract. They're either staying in Europe like some of these second-round guys like Bolden or Isaiah Hartenstein, or they've signed their regular contracts. So the only guys are Blossom Game and Rub at the moment who haven't signed those deals. Now, the guys that left this team, Tony Allen is still unsigned. There's talk that he might be back with the Grizzlies, but they need to make another roster cut to make that happen. Zach Randolph has gone to the Kings, as has Vince Carter. In the draft, we talked about Rub already. Dylan Brooks, I think he's going to be in that Zagorac sort of situation. He's going to be playing for the Hustle the majority of this season. Were you impressed with Brooks at Summer League at all?
There were some moments. I still think very raw. A guy that has the dynamic scoring possibility that is nice, but it's real unclear to me, what his NBA role will look like. I think he's, I don't know defensively what you're going to get from him. I think some of his decision-making is questionable, but he's got some interesting potential and he's got some size that you like. And I think he certainly warrants further look. But I think this year you're certainly looking at a guy that's going to spend the vast majority of his time down in South Haven. I would say as far as the Tony Allen situation, because I know you alluded to it, and I think this is one of those things. Again, nothing is sealed, nothing is signed, sealed, and delivered. But I feel like the perception of the Tony Allen thing is different outside of Memphis than it is here in Memphis when it comes to signing him. There's a lot of people who seem to think that it's like, I hear, Nate Duncan and those guys talking about the Grizzlies off season and other folks and talking about, they may look at signing Tony Allen. I mean, I would just be shocked that if that happens. They have, in my mind, moved on from Tony Allen, just as they moved on from Zach Randolph. I mean, they did not make an offer to Zach Randolph. Yeah. They didn't make him a single contract offer. They didn't do anything. And the same is true for Tony Allen. It's not, to me, a matter of like they'd like to do it if they get the. I don't think they really want to. I think they just want to move on. And he would be, in my mind, a distraction at this stage for them trying to switch and kind of start to shift away from the grit grind kind of Grizzlies to whatever this new thing is going to be. He would be a distraction because even if he doesn't play, he's going to sit on the bench. He has a tremendous cult following. People would be asking, why isn't he playing? What's he doing? What all this stuff. And I don't think they want that. And Tony is a great guy. I enjoy talking to Tony, one of my favorite guys to cover. I mean, I've, gotten to know him very well. He's a great dad. Fun. He's one of those guys. He and I will be arguing about something I wrote or something I said, and he'll take it. He doesn't like it, so he'll say and we'll go at it for a little bit. Then he'll show you pictures on his phone of his kids. I mean, and he's just that kind of a guy. He's a super guy. It won't be the same without him. But I just don't think they have any intention. I mean, unless something has changed radically, I don't think they have any intention of bringing him back, even if financially they could.
Yep, that's all fair enough, and you're obviously close to the situation, so that's the way that's looking like it's going to go down. Then let's talk about the big question I think majority of people have regarding this team, and that is Chandler Parsons. And we know that it was a disaster last year, knee issues, knee surgery. We never seem to get a clear answer to the question is if he's healthy at the moment. Like, we don't know. We've seen Instagram videos of him shooting, of him jumping when he's shooting, of him getting some arc on his shots, and it was like, oh, look at that, the arc's coming back. It's all, where are we? Because he is a guy that was really, really good before this. And I'm talking like fantasy-wise, like top 50 type of player. He's had top 50 seasons. He was just, not only was he unable to play last year because of injuries, when he played, he was putrid. Like the year before, he shot 49% from the field in Dallas. Last year, 33%. He went from 42% from three to 27% from three. Like, these are unbelievable drops. His true shooting went from 59 to 44. Like, this is unfathomable that you could be this bad and in those limited minutes. So the upside for him is absolutely sky high, but we're getting to the point where it's just like, are these knees ever going to be okay? Is he ever going to be able to return to that? And I would put decent money on it that he is going to be better than last season, because I don't think you can be worse. So that's a fairly safe bet that you can't be worse than last season. But Where are we at? What's the vibe on Parsons? I know that a lot of Memphis people turned on him almost immediately with the Instagram modeling and all that crap that he was doing. There's a lot of negativity going his way. But are you feeling any positive vibes coming from him and any hope in the knee being at least serviceable this year?
Well, I think you're right to say it would be almost impossible for him to be worse than last year, or even really as bad.
Yep.
It was he was never healthy, and I think he may well have suffered the injury that he ended up getting surgery for later in the season. He may well have suffered that injury quite early on and never really recovered from it. He looked, even when he was able to get out there and play, he looked horrible. I mean, the numbers were horrible, but the eye test was worse. He looked like a corpse out there. He had no energy. He had no movement. He had no mobility. He was awful on offense and worse on defense. And mentally, he was completely out of it. And the worst part for the Grizzlies was that it was worse that he could play, because it would have been better for everybody, including Parsons, if they had just shut him down.
Yep.
And said, look, let's just not, let's not even try this. Let's just try to get you ready for next season. Because the fact that they really forced him organizationally, they made it very clear to David Fizdale that he had to start. And that was not something that necessarily anybody wanted. But that's what they made this investment, and they wanted to see that thing happen. And so he would start, even though every indication, all of his personal numbers, all the lineup numbers with him in there, anything that you looked at, he was horrible. They still just pushed that thing and shoved it down everyone's throat. That's where the negativity came in. I don't know that it's Chandler Parsons' fault or anything like that. It's just the way that the situation goes. I don't blame the guy for signing a $94 million contract. No. No one put a gun to his head, or the Grizzlies had made they're the ones who gave him the contract. You blame them, blame their medical staff if you want to, because I don't know how thorough that physical was. Was the medical done properly? These are all legitimate questions that I don't know that we even now still have answers to. As far as optimism or anything like that, I think everyone here, in my mind at least, is very much of the wait and see approach. Last year in the summer, it was, oh, yeah, he's ready. He's close to doing. And then, when training camp rolled around, he couldn't participate. And then as the beginning of the season rolled around, he still couldn't participate. And then a few games into the season, he starts to come back, but he's never even close. So, all of the optimism that was there in the offseason last year was quickly squashed. That could be true again this year. So I think now everyone is very much of the opinion that, look, you got to do it on the court. Show me something. I don't care if it's a preseason, just something. Show me anything that looks halfway decent, and maybe then you can believe it. I don't know what you would do from a drafting standpoint. I wouldn't touch him because, maybe as just a late flyer or something, but I really think those knees, odds are that they're never going to be the same. He's coming off of 3 major knee surgeries, 2 on one knee, 1 on the other, and surgeries that go back and look at the red flags with Dallas. You're talking about a guy that was extremely close with Mark Cuban. They were boys. They were going to be they were so close that it was uncomfortable for people in the Dallas locker room. He was part of their plans, and they moved on from him after looking at his x-rays and looking at his knees. That's pretty telling. That's a big thing. And we still haven't gotten past that. And every indication thus far is that they made the right move in Dallas in moving on. And Parsons, the one thing he'll get here is plenty of opportunity. They have put all of their eggs from a transitional standpoint, it's this thing that they're trying to do doesn't really work unless he can play. And, he'll get a chance, but I don't know if he's going to be able to play.
His last season in Houston, this is 3 years ago. Like it feels like it's forever ago, but he averaged 16.5 points, 2 threes, 5.5 rebounds, 4 assists, and 1.2 steals, and shot 47% from the field. And he was the 40th ranked player. So I was going to say he's top 50, but he's top 40. Like, that's how good he was at that time. He was he was the 340th ranked player last season. So it's a
Josh, look at the numbers when he was his last probably 30 or 40 games with Dallas.
It was out of control.
It was spectacular.
Yeah.
I mean, he was basically a 50% shooter. True shooting percentage was, off the charts. I mean, he was passing.
He was doing everything.
He gets some steals, decent defense, great offensive player. That's the guy that they thought they would sign, or at least they talked themselves into thinking that they were going to sign. And the idea was to transition from what they call the core four of Mike Conley, Marc Gasol, Zach Randolph, Tony Allen, to the big three, Mike, Mark, and Chandler. But when one of the big three ends up like that, well, then that kind of screws up your plans.
JaMychal Green, the contract. Now, have you got any recent updates on where we're at with that?
Yeah, it sounds like things are moving in the direction. I talked to Ron Tillery, who covers the Grizzlies for the Commercial Appeal, beat writer, longtime former radio partner of mine, and a guy that I'm close with for covering the team and all that. He indicated on my show this morning that you're talking about a situation where 2-year contract is kind of, things seem to be heading in that direction, that it would not be a qualifying offer situation, but it wouldn't be a 4-year deal or a 5-year deal either, that we're talking like kind of a middle 2-year kind of thing. In terms of the money, I would guess that they'd probably try to give him a little something to. I don't think they want to lowball him and really create a negative vibe. So I think you're probably looking in the neighborhood of $7 to $8 million a year. So maybe 2 and 16. That's more of a guess. I think it'd be over the mid-level money, and in that neighborhood. But he just doesn't have a lot of leverage. I mean, you saw what happened with Nerlens Noel, who is a more prominent big and a guy that turned down, $17.5 million a year deal that reportedly was out there in the hopes of getting 20 plus that just never materialized. The market for restricted free agents was bad. The market for bigs was bad. The market for restricted free agent bigs was non-existent. So tough day. And I think JaMychal, I feel especially bad for him because he's a 27-year-old free agent. He's older. He was the lowest paid player on the Grizzlies last year. I mean, you're talking other than just guys that they picked up. Wade Baldwin is making like twice as much as JaMychal Green, and JaMychal Green was a big part of what the Grizzlies did last year. I think he really expected to get paid, but he's got an inexperienced agent and a bad market, and I think that kind of cost him. I do think it'll be resolved prior to training camp. Everything seems to be heading in that direction, so I would go ahead and pencil JaMychal Green in for the beginning of training camp.
Yeah, I've got him penciled in at the start because honestly, this team's pretty screwed. If he doesn't come back, they have no power forwards unless it's
absolutely
Deontay Davis or Jarrell Martin, or there's nobody to play power forward in this team unless he is there. So he's going to see 30 plus minutes, I would assume. He's currently being drafted outside the top 140 in Yahoo. He doesn't have significant upside. He's not a top 50 guy. He's not a top 75 guy, but I think he can maybe crack the top 100. So I don't mind him if you're looking for a big who you feel really confident about the minutes he's going to get. And I feel confident because, as I said, there's just no one else who's going to play these minutes. That he's going to rebound the ball. He hits some threes. He's not going to provide great defensive stats, but a good field goal percentage, a good free throw percentage, maybe ups his scoring, has to up his rebounding because Zach Randolph just took so many rebounds last year that people have to step up unless this team is going to be the absolute worst team in the NBA with rebounding. Someone's going to have to grab those boards, and Green and Gasol are going to be the two main contributors there. So I like him at those late picks, just because that role feels really secure for him once he actually finally signs. Now, the two big players on this team obviously is Conley and Gasol. I thought we saw Mike Conley take his game to another level last season, and I think he can do it again this year and go forward. I also think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, I think that that David Fizdale and the Grizzlies want to actually play a little bit faster than what they did last year, and the removal of Tony Allen and Zach Randolph from the roster will enable him to pick up the pace a bit, and I think that will suit Mike Conley, and that will help his numbers as well.
I think everything to me lines up for Mike Conley to continue to have great success and to build on the really impressive year that he put together last year. David Fizdale, for all the talk about Marc Gasol, the truth is that David Fizdale built this offense for Mike Conley. Everything was done with Conley in mind. He genuinely, he being Fizdale, genuinely feels like Mike Conley is a truly elite special point guard on probably a higher level than most people think that he is. And that's the way that he prepared the way that things went. He prepared the offense with that in mind. If you watched last year, and I know you did, I mean, the Grizzlies ran Mike Conley off the ball far more under David Fizdale than they had done prior to that. I mean, and Conley's one of the elite, truly elite catch and shoot guys in the league. He's one of the elite off pick and roll, one dribble, and if a guy goes under a screen, boom, like he can hit that three like nobody's business. He is elite in that regard. He improved on all those scoring metrics, and he's just a spectacular player. So I think that you'll see more of that this year. You're right to bring up the pace. That is something that really troubled Fizdale last year, and he said it in no uncertain terms, where guys, he felt like he had a slow team. I was there talking to him at one point during practice last year, and he starts pointing to guys and saying, this guy's slow, this guy's slow, this guy's slow. And I'm a little uncomfortable because I'm like, I think they can hear you. I'm pretty sure that you're talking loud enough where I hope they're not looking at me. I'm not saying this. This is your coach. He didn't. I mean, he said it publicly lots. We're slow. We one of the oldest teams. We're this. He really feels like athletically they have to be better. They have to be faster. That's one of the reasons why they signed McLemore. They feel like he's a really good athlete and can pick up pace. Tyreke Evans, same kind of thing. Give him a guy that can move and get up and down a little bit. They want those guys to do that. So yeah, I think he wants to play. He's very much a believer in the more modern NBA game where it does involve more spacing and more pace, and possession number goes up a little bit. He incorporated more space last year, but not so much pace. I think the pace will jump up a little bit this year. JaMychal Green is part of that too, and JaMychal, if he can hit that corner three a little more consistently, that would help. But he has that in his game, and he's a little mini. He's got some elements of Draymond Green in his ability to switch onto smaller guards and cover them even out to the perimeter. If you watch, those of you that will have access to Synergy, or those of you that can look for JaMychal Green steals last year, and look at the number of elite guards he stole the ball from, like just clean steals. Like Steph Curry, he picked his pocket a couple different times. Chris Paul picked his pocket a couple times. John Wall, these are guys, big time guards, and switched on him, and he stole it. Like, he's got great hands. He's a really good defensive player in that regard. So I think Fizdale really values him a lot, and that was part of the reason he put Zach Randolph on the bench last year, was because he really did have confidence that JaMychal Green could be a better fit for the kind of system he wants to run, and I think evidence showed that he was right.
Conley is a player that he was the 22nd ranked player last season, and for some reason he's getting drafted at pick 31 on Yahoo and 32 on ESPN, so I have no idea why they're expecting regression from him. If that pace increases, his numbers go up. He averaged, after the All-Star break, 23 points per game on 49% shooting, with 6 assists and 2.7 threes and 1.3 steals. It's true shooting of 64%. So we're talking elite numbers. If you want a point guard in the second round, I would have no problem taking Mike Conley over Kyle Lowry in that range. I think he is definitely having him over Isaiah Thomas. There's no doubt about that in my mind. And he is a strong guy who's going to move into the third round in certain situations, and I'd be totally fine with that. I love Conley for this season. I'm pretty interested in Gasol as well, who is being undervalued by his ADP at 34 and 36. I've said this on nearly every podcast that getting centers who play consistent roles is really tough to do. And I believe that Gasol, he saw his rebounding numbers dip last season. He saw his three-pointers increase. But without Randolph there, like, somebody has to take these extra rebounds. And Gasol's going to have to get his rebounding numbers up. He's a positive contributor in pretty much every category. The threes will stay. He's an exceptional passer. And I think he's being a little bit undervalued as well. And it's going to be him and Conley that are carrying this team for the majority of the season.
Well, if you bring up Marc Gasol and rebounding, I think you're going to be disappointed if you expect rebounding from Marc Gasol, even with those rebounds having to come from somewhere. He just is. It's not a priority for him. It never has been. I don't think it ever will be. Mentally, he doesn't care. I'm not saying he doesn't care about rebounding, but he just doesn't prioritize actually him getting the rebound. He would much rather block out or go do something else or whatever. He just that's not something that he feels like is a huge priority for him. So I don't think that's going to change. I mean, we've seen that over the course of the years. And Mark is a frustrating guy at times because he really doesn't. A lot of guys say they don't care about stats. He really doesn't. Like, he does. I talk to him all the time about certain numbers, and he gets angry. He just gets irritated that I bring it up. He doesn't like to look at it or really focus on it. So, for a fantasy perspective, that's probably not ideal, because a lot of guys that actually care about their numbers would get you better stats. He doesn't really do that. That said, he's still a supremely quality center. If you're watching him in Eurobasket, I mean, he's making great passes. He looks like he's even in better shape. The guy has leaned up so much over the course of his career, and he's leaned up as a result of this scare with his foot. He recovered from an injury, and Josh, you know, because you focus on injuries and the long-term ramifications and all that stuff you have to in your job. What he recovered from is really unprecedented.
Yeah, it was stunning.
We've never seen anything like it from a player of his age, and especially from a big man.
Yep.
Those mid-foot fractures are career enders for bigs and for players past the age of 26, 27. So he knows that. He really considers it a bit of a miracle. He worked his ass off to make all that come to fruition. So he's even in better shape now than he was then. He looks terrific. Who knows with the foot, but everything looks good from that perspective. He's really, he's a different player. It's just that he doesn't prioritize the stuff that you would normally see centers prioritize. He'd much rather stay out and be the passer at the elbow, or step out, shoot that three, or orchestrate on offense rather than be a focal point on the interior. So that is, you have to take that into consideration when you're picking it.
Yeah, look, he's a solid third-round guy to me. Look, we know what he's going to do. He's hitting his threes. He's going to be a good, decent scorer. Rebounds will go up. He's not going to get 10 a game. Well, we're well aware of that. But they will have to go up a little bit. The assists, the steals, the blocks, it's all there. Sensational rotisserie center as well. So, yeah, I think you should feel pretty good about Marc Gasol in that third round. Now, what I don't think you should feel all that great about is, at this point, Peter, I would say that their first big man off the bench is perhaps Deontay Davis, or would you say it's Brandon Wright? Whichever one is, it's a bit of a scary proposition.
It's a big question, without a doubt. I think at this point it would be Deontay Davis. They really want him to succeed. But I was a little alarmed watching him in Summer League. Not that Summer League is that telling, but it was just his size. He didn't look very dynamic. He looked like he lost some of that that extra little zip that he had. Part of it was that he had serious athletic ability. He was very rangy and could be a great weak side shot blocker and could come over and use length and athleticism to make up ground. That was kind of not there for Summer League. It was like he had gotten bigger and maybe a little stronger, but also slower and much more leaden. That's not him. So I don't know if they were trying in their training stuff to bulk him up, and they just kind of misjudged all that stuff. That's possible, or maybe it's just out of shape. That's possible too, but that's alarming because they are going to need him. They are definitely going to need him. Brandon Wright, In a pinch, maybe they would use him. But like I said earlier, I think Fizdale views him as more of a specialist within certain matchups, where his diving to the basket off that pick and roll is valuable. Defensively, he doesn't offer as much upside, certainly, and maybe not even as much in the present as Deontay Davis very well could. So I think they'd like Davis to be the guy. I don't know that he's there. And if not, I do think you'll also see a lot more use of smaller lineups from Fizdale. I think they would like to see Chandler Parsons play a few minutes at the 4. That would be, something that as he gets older, he's going to probably naturally transition to that spot anyway. They would like to see him do that. And if he's not dynamic at the 3 in smaller lineups, maybe you can get away with him at the 4, depending on who he would defend and how that would look on the other end of the floor. I think you would certainly see some of that. Long term, a guy like Roddy Zagoratz, they would want to see him probably as that 4. Vince Carter was playing a little bit of that too. So that's another option if things don't work out for a traditional 4 in that spot. I don't know. There's a lot of questions, and right now, I mean, Ivan Rabb would have probably been in the running to take a few of these minutes as well, but he's not there. I don't see it from Jarrell Martin. Again, I will be very surprised if Jarrell Martin is on the roster on opening night. One way or the other, I don't see it.
Davis is an interesting guy for dynasty fantasy perspective because his shot blocking ability is huge. Field goal percentage can be big, huge rebounder as well, and all those things can be really useful. But as you said, in Summer League, he just looked lost half the time he was out there. He looked like he'd lost a lot of explosion. He looked like he didn't know where he was supposed to be, and that was part of the knock on him, I guess, why he slid to the second round of the draft. Just didn't look like he knew what he was supposed to be doing for a lot of the time that he was out there. But he does still have that potential. The role is opening up a little bit here for him as well. So he's an interesting guy as a buy low guy too.
The other thing, Josh, is that he, for whatever it's worth, Marc Gasol has taken an interest in Deontay Davis and took him under his wing last year. Gave him a few tips. Really was really close with him, and I think he sees a lot in Deontay. So that to me is a good sign for Deontay getting more minutes and more influence. I think they really do, much like I was talking about with Chandler Parsons and with Ben McLemore. Davis is one of those guys they want to succeed. So they're going to give him a chance to show that he can't. I think he's the favorite at this point to get more of those minutes. Whether he can actually do that. I mean, again, he's 20. He's very young. So a lot of growing up still to do, and maybe it takes him a little longer than they wanted for that to happen. But I do think he's got I like him. He's one of my favorite. I think he was a great pick, and he's still got monster potential, but it was alarming to see him take a step back in Summer League.
What do we make of Wade Baldwin, who was horrible for a lot of the time? Yeah, shot an unfathomable 13% from 3. He was 31% from the field. He was going to take a little bit of time to develop, and there's no pressure on him because obviously Mike Conley is there. But Andrew Harrison overtook him pretty quickly as that backup point guard. They brought Tony Douglas in. Where do we see Baldwin here? I was impressed with him at Summer League. I thought, he looks, unlike Davis, he looks like he was taking steps forward, and he's obviously really long, explosive, gets to the rim, and all that stuff's going to work in his favour. So I think we might be seeing a much different Wade Baldwin this season. But as someone closer to the team, do you have less faith, more faith in him than what I do?
Baldwin is a tough one because it was so strange last year. You'll remember, his opening night.
Oh my God, the start of the season.
Timberwolves. He has 3 steals and 3 blocks. And it's insane for a rookie point guard. It never happens. Who does that? And so you're thinking, oh my God, this guy could do anything. He's got, tremendous physical tools. Guy's very long. He's very athletic. Problem is you talk about a guy that has no idea what he's doing on the court. That is Wade Baldwin. He has not a clue what he's going to do when he's driving the ball to the basket. And it's like he jumps up and then tries to figure out in midair what the plan is. It doesn't work. It didn't work last year. I wasn't as impressed with him. I thought he was okay in Summer League. It was a little better. We saw some improvement, but long way to go. And I still think his basketball IQ is not where it needs to be a key part of this team. I think it would solve a lot of problems for them if he could just, take the reins of that backup point guard spot and really dominate. But that's what they wanted last year. And Andrew Harrison, he couldn't beat out Andrew Harrison. I mean, he couldn't beat out a lot of guys. And remember, when the Grizzlies went out and signed Mario Chalmers was a week after Summer League.
Yep.
When they had said they were going to use Summer League as a real evaluational tool for him. So to me, that doesn't bode especially well for Wade Baldwin either, because I don't think that they have a lot of faith in him, in what he showed. I don't see it, and I don't think his attitude is that great, to be honest with you. He didn't have a great reputation coming into the league as a real good teammate. He's a little better in that regard, but I just don't know that the attitude is where you would want it to be for a guy that really does have a lot of improving to do. So I am rather pessimistic about Wade Baldwin, and maybe I can be proven wrong, but I don't have a lot of expectation for him this year.
On look at this team, like some value fantasy guys, I think that Conley and Gasol are valuable, probably an extra round of value on them. And as I've said, I like Tyreek as a last pick. I also like Chandler Parsons as a last pick because, again, if for some way that it does come together and he's healthy, and you'd find that out in the first week of the season, then you've got a comfortable top 100, potentially top 60 guy on your roster, much like Tyreek. So either one of those guys with the last pick is totally fine to do. But yeah, if it's still struggling the first 2 weeks, you just say, see you later. And we'll just move on and just accept that it's pretty much done. But the upside is still tantalizing there for Parsons. And again, we're only really 1 year removed from him having a comfortable top 80 season, and the way that he finished as a top 40 player in Dallas in those last 3 months. Like, if he's healthy, that he can get back to that level. So I like him as a last pick. Same as Tyreek, and McLemore's a guy to probably just watch at this point rather than draft. And I don't think anyone on this team is really overvalued in terms of their draft position. JaMychal Green, you can get some value on as well. He's getting picked outside the top 140. Maybe the upside's not quite there, but I still think that you can get value on JaMychal Green there. Now, Peter, before I let you go, the Vegas over-under totals are out for the wins for the season. They have released the Grizzlies at 37.5, which is low. You might not think it's low, but it's lower than what they were last year. Do you think that they go over or under?
I think they go. I think they go over, but that's an interesting number because I think you're building in injury concerns, and rightly so. You get, like, right now, do you think, and I'll just ask you, Josh, do you think you're going to get 140 games combined from Conley and Gasol?
140 from those two? Let me see, because I have projected this out, so let me see what I've actually got them projected at. Yes, I've got them at 145 combined.
Okay, 145 combined. Now, if you get that, I think you're comfortably over 37.5.
Yep.
Because if you're getting 72 games from each of those guys, they're missing 10, no big deal. You could survive that. You're fine. If, on the other hand, your projections are less optimistic, as some are, about them, about Chandler Parsons, about, there are lots of injury concerns on this team. And this is where, it really is like a kind of a Rorschach test of sorts for the team. Like, how pessimistic do you want to be? Because there's really, apart from Conley and Gasol, and really including Conley and Gasol, pretty much everybody on the Grizzlies, if you look at their roster, every single player has either injury concerns or concerns about their ability to fill the role that they're going to be asked to play. You may exclude Mike Conley from the injury concerns, even though he's had a propensity to pick up, little small knocks here and there and miss, a few games at a time. You can exclude Marc Gasol because of what he did last year. Although, again, as guys age and centers age, that has not always been especially good for their ability to play, most of a season. But you take those guys out of the mix, look at the rest of that roster, Josh. Who would you guarantee, in terms of either injury or role? I mean, there's questions everywhere. So if you're inclined to say that you think all those questions will be answered in the positive and the affirmative, then you would be able to you'd say, oh man, they're comfortably going to beat 37.5. They're going to be a playoff team. If they're a playoff team, then chances are you're talking 43, 44 wins. So they're easily over that. If you are the type of person that says, well, I think they're going to answer probably most of those questions in the negative, then yeah, I think the under could be in play. I think their range, there probably aren't too many teams that have a bigger variance in terms of ceiling and floor. I think you could talk yourself into 48 wins for them, 50 maybe, if you really if everything goes great, or you could talk yourself into like 28 to 30. That's if they get a key injury, if Parsons can't come back, if Gasol or Conley miss a month or two, then that it could get squirrely very quickly. So I would tend to say over, but I can certainly understand those that are skeptical.
If either of Conley or Gasol suffers an injury that costs him 20 games, yeah, this team's done. Like they're in a ton of trouble if that happens. But
absolutely,
if they're fine, then yeah, they're gonna drive everything. And yeah, the peripheral Tyreeks and Parsons, it's all gonna come down to to Conley and Gasol, and those other things can be additions on top. But if one of those, even if they miss, say they miss 10 games each, but Conley misses 10 games and then Gasol misses 10 games. Yeah, at a separate time, that's 20 games where there's only one of them around. That's going to make it hard for them as well.
Absolutely.
If they miss 10 games each and both at the same time, that's the perfect scenario for them. Hey, let's lose these 10 games, whatever, and then they can come back and we'll be fine. But they are in a real weird situation with this roster. So many questions to be answered. JaMychal Green, who's going to actually make the final roster? Who's going to be healthy? What are they going to do? We're not going to know this stuff until probably half this stuff until November. It's going to be really interesting to see how this all pans out. And we'll
and here's the other thing, Josh, too, is if you look, and I know that the talk of late, and I think the Grizzlies aren't, they were never ever shopping Marc Gasol. They were never interested, and they haven't been in dealing him or anything like that. But Mark has said that, as long as the ambitions of the Grizzlies match his own, and he still wants to try to win a title at some point, the Grizzlies seem quite far away from that. But, he said as long as their ambitions are to try to get better and all this stuff, then he's cool with it. But if things start to change, then he's all of a sudden not cool with it. If you can see the Grizzlies, if you think that the Grizzlies are going to get off to a bad start and you think things are going to kind of go south, then as the trade deadline approaches, and it's earlier this year, February 8th, as opposed to 23rd or so like it was last year, it's a couple weeks earlier this year. As that deadline approaches, the idea that Mark or maybe Mike, but probably Mark, would begin to agitate for a trade is not out of the realm of possibility either. When you start to look at things like that, if you remember his brother, Powell, prior to being traded to the Lakers, he made a trade request with the Grizzlies. It was a very mild-mannered trade request because Powell is a very mild-mannered, classy individual. But he did go to management at the time and did ask to be traded. So, could that happen again? I'm not saying it will, but if you are thinking about an over-under, you start thinking about how an entire season is going to go. That sort of possibility can't be discounted.
Peter, everyone will be interested to hear what's going on with the Grizzlies. They can listen to Locked On Grizzlies. What have you got coming up on the show, and anything else that you want to plug that you're doing? Well,
as we're going to continue to talk a lot, Josh, about a lot of the issues that we've discussed. The roster is a fascinating one for this team. So a lot of the minutia of the roster we really get into. The JaMychal Green stuff that you alluded to, we're going to talk about the contract and where things stand. We'll be doing that coming up very, very soon on the show, getting into that type of stuff. And then, before we know it, their media day is September 25th. So you're talking about, basically 2.5 weeks. Camp opens the next day. So we're going to be into it hard and heavy at that point. So yeah, it's coming up very quickly We'll be doing all of that and more on Locked On Grizzlies. I appreciate the plug because I know you have a ton of listeners from Locked On Fantasy, and you do a heck of a good job, man. So I appreciate all the props. We could use them. We appreciate everybody coming in, listening to our little neck of the podcast woods over here.
Appreciate that, Peter. And yeah, go and listen to Peter on Locked On Grizzlies, and give both of our podcasts a 5-star review, whether that's on Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify. Subscribe, give us those 5-star reviews. That is really a cheap and easy way that you can help support my podcast, Peter's podcast, and the rest of the Locked On Podcast Network. Peter, thank you once again for coming on for the second year in a row.
Cheers, Josh. Anytime. If you want, we can do it during the season. I like I said, anything for you, I appreciate it, buddy, and I hope things are well down under.
Absolutely, things are going pretty well. We are done here, guys. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya. Andrew Harrison.